Hello, people of God. It's another gorgeous day to be sitting on the front porch, considering what God has in store for us. Today, I want to continue our conversation about knowing who we serve. Today, we're focused on God and God's response in Exodus chapter 3. I am who I am. So I invite you to begin with opening your Bible to Exodus chapter 3 and reading verses 1 to 15. And then let's talk about this amazing burning bush story and the encounter Moses has with God. We know the gist of the story. If you've just read those 15 verses, Moses sees a burning bush, he checks it out, he has this conversation with God, and big things are in store for Moses. But when Moses starts to have doubts and to question, God's response is, I am who I am. But let's look at this story and how we can experience this today. What is it that we do that helps us to know who God is? Where's our burning bush? Where's the voice of God for you and for me? There's 3 things in these 15 verses that stand out to me. Number 1, Moses practices the pause. Number 2, where do we find holy ground? And number 3, who does God say that God is? Moses practiced the pause. This is one of the most important things that I can offer to you and me today, is we too need to practice the pause. Because in practicing the pause, we find the encounter. For Moses, he sees this bush that's on fire, but he stops. He pauses. In verse 3, he says, I must turn aside and look at this great sight and see why the bush is not burned up. Everybody, anybody walking by could see the burning bush. It's right there in plain sight. This is not a secret hidden encounter, and this is why we must practice the pause. Anyone can see the burning bush. But if they're so busy doing what they do, living in the world, doing worldly things, focused on something else, they don't see it there on the side of the road. They don't see it burning up, but not being consumed. Are we like that? Aren't we moving through the world with tunnel vision and forgetting to pause and notice what's around us? Have we missed seeing the burning bush? If so, then we're missing out. Because if we miss the burning bush, we miss the conversation with God. Moses walks up to the bush before he ever hears God's voice. Practicing the pause enabled Moses to draw closer to God. That nearness opened Moses up to a different relationship with God. He was able to finally know God because of this encounter. We all have burning bushes in our lives. It's just like God's grace. It's always there, always waiting for us to notice. And once we've noticed God's grace, that prevenient grace, then we are opened up to a new relationship with God. It began for Moses with a burning bush. It began for Moses by practicing the pause. The next thing that happened to him is hearing God speak. And God says, come no closer. Take off your sandals, for where you are standing is holy ground. Holy ground. What's holy ground, people of God? What is holy ground, and where do we find it? Moses is in an unlikely place. He's not anywhere near a safe and sacred space that he could imagine. He is out tending the flock. And he's found himself on a rocky, rough mountain. And yet here, in this rocky, rough terrain, he's told he is on holy ground. Now, God tells him to take off his shoes, because where he is holy. Out of a sign of respect and reverence, out of his own humility, Moses takes off those sandals. Moses is able to meet God where God needs Moses to be, and he removes those shoes as a sign of that respect, acknowledging the holy ground, acknowledging the presence of God with him. Now me, I think God has a sense of humor. If God was getting ready to tell me some really big news, like he was getting ready to tell Moses, you know the news. Hey, Moses, I need you to lead my people out of Egypt. Really? That's big news. I would think God would want me to take off my shoes just so that I couldn't run too fast. So here we have Moses, barefoot and listening to God. Barefoot, not able to run fast and hard whenever he hears the news of discipleship. Are we Moses? Or have we kept our shoes on so that when we encounter God on holy ground, maybe we're ready to sprint and run? Holy ground, people of God. Holy ground is wherever we are when we engage with God, because it's always holy ground wherever God is present. And we've already learned in this series that God is always with us. When we are willing to calm and practice the pause, when we engage with God, when we discover that justifying grace, when we get there, when we hear God speak, are we going to stand and listen to the call God puts on our life? Are we going to accept that mission? Or are we going to run? That brings us to the third thing, knowing who God is, who God says God is. Moses was ready to run. He put all kinds of obstacles in the way. Who, me? Who, me? Do you say who, me, when God asks for something out of you? Remember, people of God, that God never calls the equipped. God equips the called. Moses, just like you and I, could put up any number of obstacles, some of which we create on our own if we're honest about it. We can make every excuse we want. We can ignore the call for as long as we want, but the call is still going to be there. It's ours. God is inviting us to come alongside God in the mission of the world. We each have something that we can do, something different, something unique, that's just for you and just for me. But until we know who God is, can we really come alongside God? Are we like Moses, that when we get through with all the excuses, we finally end up saying, but who do I tell the people are sending me? Who do I say invited me into this work? God says, I am who I am. God is God. God always has been, is, and always will be. When we choose to come alongside God and to work with God on that mission for the whole world, we're encountering God's sanctifying grace. It's a beautiful thing, and it's ours. All we have to do is reach out, practice the pause, recognize we're on holy ground in God's presence, and accept God is who God says God is, the great I am. God said, I am who I am, the God of Abraham, of Isaac, of Jacob, the God of the ancestors. This God shares that his name forever is I am. There's a wasp that's trying to entertain me. It's already stung me once. In the most grammatical sense of understanding, I am means that a person is. It means existing or being. It's generally a linking verb that ties the subject to a modifier. But God needs no further description. God simply is. God simply exists. God can simply say, I am. In Hebrew, this comes to become the name of God, W-H-Y-H, or Yahweh. These Hebrew letters, when combined, mean to be, to become, to come to pass. The name of God is the one who was and is to come. Who is God? God is being. God is existing. God is who God is. And this God that simply exists and simply is, this is the one who's calling us to acts of service. We serve God, the great I am. We serve the God who truly is, not an artificial deity, but the real deal. It's easy to let this be complicated, but it isn't. If we practice the pause and stop running, we can see the beauty in serving the one true living God. We know who we serve, but do we know God intimately? Last week I shared that I can't tell you who Jesus is any more than you can tell me. We can share our experiences with one another, but ultimately each person must come to know Jesus for him or herself. We must each individually cultivate that relationship, just like Moses did. The story of the people of God shows us how to build that relationship. Remember, everyone can see the burning bush, but not everyone is curious enough to walk up to it. We have to walk up to it in order to hear God speaking. If we miss the burning bush, we miss the conversation with God, and then we miss knowing who God is and knowing who we serve. We have to practice the pause. We have to be aware of what's around us. If God is everywhere, then everywhere is holy ground. There's always a burning bush nearby. There's always the voice of God speaking to us, but we aren't always listening. Pause, people of God. Practice the pause. Look around and see God's presence among us. Witness God moving in your life and in the life of others. Walk up to that burning bush and listen to what God is saying. Be willing to experience the call and be ready with a response. Know who you serve. Together we serve the great I am. Thanks be to God.